This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. On Socialist News and Views, we let folks, and that's our special interview, introduce themselves to each of you. Just want to let folks know who you are. You can start, John, if you want.
Sure. I'm John Reimann. I was the recording secretary of Carpenters Local 713, and I was expelled from that union. I was active in the labor movement for many years. I was expelled from that union for leading a wildcat strike in 1999, and I was a founding member of the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign, and I do a blog site, oaklandsocialist.com.
Thanks, John. Guillermo?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Guillermo Kane. I am a member of the Partido Obrero of Argentina, of its Central Committee. I've been 3 times elected parliamentary in the province of Buenos Aires. Have currently left the seat because of the agreement of rotation that we have in the Left Workers' Unity Front, which I was elected by on those 3 occasions over the last 10 years. I've been an organizer of the unemployed movement in the province of Buenos Aires and in Argentina, particularly of the Polo Obrero, which is a neighborhood organization that the Partido Obrero has founded over 25 years ago. And I'm currently a teacher, a professor at the University of Buenos Aires. So yeah, I think that's
thanks, Guillermo. Yeah. I wanted to start with you, Guillermo, because we had spoken before. You had come on the program. It's actually, I was just looking. I lose track of time. It's been like almost exactly a year since we spoke last. And at that time, we were discussing Javier Milei coming to power in Argentina. You were kind of discussing his shock and awe operation. At that time, you said with the devaluation of the currency and Milei kind of fixing wages and the budget to the values of 2023, you said that many public services were going to have to shut down, public universities and things like that. And you had said that the security minister at that time had said they would not allow public demonstrations. Now in the U.S., we have Donald Trump, who just came back to power in January. He's got his own shock and awe campaign. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in Argentina over the past year, and then a little bit about the relationship between Trump and Milei? I know they have this ongoing, friendship or whatever you want to call it, relationship.
Yes. They are admirers of each other, allies, as it were. Well, a lot has happened in this year since we've talked, Nick. I want to try to be brief because and not bore you with the details or right. Go over the possibilities of the show. But let's say, on the one hand, there have been strong battles by the masses against the Milei government. And these demonstrations and some processes of strike and so on have had a mass character. But on the most part, the big problem we've had is that mass leaderships, which are aligned with the bourgeois opposition, mostly trade union bureaucracy, but also the authorities of universities and other influences on the mass movement, have had a policy which I think is probably very close to what the Democratic Party is doing in the States now, which is demobilize and say, we'll get them next election. They're voted in. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to oppose in the streets as the main policy. And so they've tried to maneuver to give some channel of demonstrating against the government every few months, but for that not to build up into a momentum outside of an institutional framework of real direct action on a mass level. So we've had demonstrations of maybe 1 million people in the streets in defending public universities, for example, which have gotten some gains. We've had many demonstrations when the Peronists and the trade union bureaucracy did not call to mobilize, where maybe the left and independent sectors, so we were maybe several thousands, but not a mass character, which have faced very strong repression. We've had fighting with the police and pepper spray and arrests every week, this year. Comrades have been in jail. Some comrades have been, 70 days in jail or whatever. We have many comrades of our neighborhood organization, the Polo Obrero, facing trumped-up charges. 15 leaders of ours are going to go probably to trial in the next few months. So there's a very strong political persecution, and at the same time, this idea that they were going to clean the streets and that it was going to be impossible to demonstrate was not able to be enforced either. There's evidently a very strong hatred towards the Milei government in a large and growing sector of the working class and the youth, though he also has his supporters. It's a very divided political landscape. And it is the parliamentary collaboration of Peronist, radicals, and other traditional bourgeois parties of Argentina who are voting Milei's laws, who just, for example, he had this big scandal with the cryptocurrency. I'm sure you saw it, the fraud, this huge scale fraud. And in the Senate of the Congress, the opposition did not even vote for an investigative committee to be formed. Actually, the same bourgeois senator of the conservative Radical Party who had proposed the investigative commission then voted against it. So they're all playing a game of collaborating because the bourgeoisie likes the sort of reforms Milei is pushing, so it says general support. And basically, it's also a very corrupt scheme where they're negotiating vote by vote, and he's always finding enough bourgeois senators and congressmen to sell their votes, basically. So that on the one hand, and the trade union bureaucracy blocking, while the wages are being destroyed, there's a very strong recession, there are a lot of layoffs in the state and also in the private sector. The private sector industry is being gutted. Commerce has also gone down, and construction has practically stopped because a lot of it had to do with state promoted public works and so on. So that's been completely halted. So it's a very bad condition for the working class, and without a leadership that's has not been able to be improvised. That being said, in the past few months, there have been two important actions which have gone completely outside of the plans of the bourgeois opposition, and which we've been a part of. One important one was the takeover of 100 universities between, I think, November and December, when the president vetoed an increase in the university budget and wages, and collaborationist oppositionists that let that veto pass in Congress. So when that selling their votes, like I was telling you about, when that happened, the left campaigned that it was not enough to just do marches, and that you had to take over the universities, and that movement spread like wildfire, even to universities with no history of leftist organization and so on. They were massively occupied. So that was important, but it sort of petered out towards the end of the year without really achieving concrete gains as of this point. But it showed that this sort of thing could advance. The other thing that happened recently, which was very interesting, was when Trump came to power, and from our point of view, put forward a policy that goes towards fascism, even if it is not as of yet a fascist regime as such, but which tied to its militaristic and expansionist policies poses the danger of fascism. And Milei came back from Trump's inauguration and the international fanfare he perceived to have received by Elon Musk and Trump's support and so on. First thing he did, he went to Davos Economic Forum, and he did a profoundly reactionary and homophobic speech, saying homosexuals are pedophiles. And he also tweeted in defense of Elon Musk's Nazi salute, saying that Elon Musk is no Nazi because he supports Israel as Milei does, and that he was going to pursue leftists who are spreading these lies to the last corner of the earth. So it sounds pretty Nazi to me, but
right. And didn't he give Musk his chainsaw or whatever too? Wasn't that that thing he was rolling around?
So what I wanted to tell you is like he got really riled up that week that Trump came to power, but with these homophobic remarks sparked organizations of the LGBTQ community to do an assembly. The left, women, and LGBTQ community organizations also formed a part of. There was a debate there. The sectors more influenced by Peronism did not want to demonstrate. Independents and left wanted a big demonstration response to Milei, and that turned the February 1st into a mass demonstration, which probably saw 1 million people in the streets again. It was called anti-fascist, anti-racist demonstration, and that even though it had confused or contradictory slogans and sectors, bourgeois sectors that also were a part, I'm not going to say it's a revolutionary class movement. It's a very contradictory movement, but it was a very progressive mass response in the streets the week after he had not only made these speeches, but several legal projects against migrants, against women, and against LGBTQ communities in line with this sort of fascistic recharge of Trump coming to power. So I don't know. It's difficult to sum up this year because a year is difficult to sum up, and this has been a very intense year of class and political struggle. Milei ended the year appearing to have some semblance of stability because of a system of how do you say this of like official tax evasion. I don't know, like illegal money being able to be made legal. Which was one of the decisions he made, a moratorium, right, so to speak, and IMF money and so on. And so he had reached, even with the increase in poverty, some semblance of financial stability, and inflation had stopped growing so fast, though it's still growing. And then the beginning of the year, first with this mass march, and now with the political scandal around his corruption, around this terrible fraud that they did with the cryptocurrency, with the Milei cryptocurrency called Libra, which in one night, was a huge theft of his own supporters. So it's definitely a moving situation, and we think both the Women Workers International Day coming 8th of March and the anniversary of the dictatorship, the 1976 coup d'etat that's coming up March 24th, are going to be mass demonstrations. They're going to show strong opposition to the Milei government, and also strikes. Important strikes are starting up in teachers' unions because classes are starting. In university, teachers are also discussing important strikes. One factory where we have comrades here in southern area of the Greater Buenos Aires, printing publisher called Morbicho, has been occupied by its workers against the factory shutting down, which is important because even if it's a small factory, it's a very sharp contrast to the policy of the trade union bureaucracy. So they're calling this Thursday an open meeting to delegates of all unions and factories to do a common march against the Industrialist Union of Argentina against layoffs. So we're definitely working for and pushing for that to become a center of working class activity against the truce and of the bureaucracy, of the union bureaucracy with the government and the bosses.
Well, I appreciate that. Trump has had his own same thing with cryptocurrency and stuff. I mean, there was like a pump and dump, like right when he came to power, which kind of got covered, but he's flooded the zone so much that they haven't covered it. Now, John, you mentioned you run OaklandSocialist.com, and I know over the past month since Trump came to power, you've had a number of great guest contributors sharing about the impacts the Trump administration has had in different corners of the world. You had a report from Ukraine, how Trump paralyzed global healthcare for 90 days and killed millions of people by Cloud Sevens. You had React Before It's Too Late against the Brown International, Putin, Trump, Musk, Netanyahu by Yorgos Mitrialis. Can you talk about how it is that, you know, Trump was able to come back to power? You know, what you think the primary goals of the, you know, Trump's kind of authoritarian rule, and maybe this, you know, Brown International, as Mitrialis puts it. You know, what are the goals? What are the goals here, and what do you see? What do you see them doing that's most concerning, John?
Well, also I've written a lot about it, and what you ask is really the question of the hour.
Right.
What you have now is a layer of the capitalist class that you know, in Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, she describes a group of psychologists who believed that they could completely disassemble a person's psyche through a whole series of severe electric shocks, and then reassemble their psyche or their psychology, their personality, in a way that they considered appropriate. And what you have now is a layer of capitalists who have the enormous conceit that, of course, with what Naomi Klein described, they didn't reassess those people. They are permanently shattered, is what she described. Right. And you now have a layer of capitalists who have an enormous conceit that they can do the same, not to individuals, but to all of U.S. and, in fact, global capitalism. And you have that at the same time as we saw the spectacle last week of Trump and Vance, the U.S. president and vice president, channeling one of the main rivals of U.S. capitalism, and not just any rival, but I'm talking about Putin. He is the world centralizing and organizing force on the global scale for reaction, ethno-nationalism, and actually fascism. So the question is, how did all of that come about? And what you've had in the United States is decades and decades of unanswered attacks from neoliberalism. And that has led to an enormous vacuum that's developed in American society. And as a result, you had the rise of reactionary, bigoted, violent, petty, and in some cases actually fascist, petty bourgeois movement that has actually drawn in tens of millions of workers into it. I'm talking about MAGA, with this cult leader of Donald Trump. And like all petty bourgeois movements, that movement had to be taken over by some sector of the capitalist class. And what you saw it developing during the election campaign, and now it's been consolidated. A layer of this, really the Silicon Valley venture capitalists, Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin, and first and foremost, Elon Musk. Now, what this layer of capitalists did, they tore down an entire industry, and a vital industry at that, the communication and entertainment, which is to say the information industry. They disassembled it and reassembled it to their own wishes, incidentally, completely crushing all workers' rights in the process. And they then developed the idea that what they did in their industry, they could do in American society as a whole. So that is their aim. Now, how did they develop that conceit? The other part of it, and how did they develop that view of unchecked, that they have unchecked power? And the answer to that has to be seen in the absolute massive crisis in the United States working class, which incidentally, I don't think is confined, that crisis is not confined to the United States alone. And I think that it explains why you see the rise of reaction all around the world. You have about half of the working class voters voted for Trump. Statistics show that 40% of voters from union households voted for Trump. And you had that 80-year war. The reason that there's been this utter confusion has been that we've had an 80-year war against all the best traditions of the US working class and of the labor movement. The traditions of solidarity, the traditions of socialism, the traditions of mass defiance. And I have to say, every single sector of the union leadership, both the right-wing ones and the so-called progressive ones, have participated in that war. And it's not been just a propaganda campaign. They have ostracized, they have blackballed, they've physically assaulted, and they have expelled those members, myself included, who have tried to maintain those old traditions and tried to apply them, the methods of the 1930s, advocated that those same methods should be applied today. So that is the explanation for this enormous confusion that has developed in the US working class. And I have to say that the socialist movement here in the United States, the confusion in the working class is the socialist movement, to the extent that it even exists, it magnifies that confusion 20 times over. In all my time, I entered the workforce in 1970. In all my time, the socialist movement today is more distanced from the working class than it has ever been, certainly in my years. And for one thing, every single sector of it, with one or two exceptions, have basically capitulated to this union leadership and have done absolutely nothing to organize a resistance. I saw Guillermo was at that Labor Fest. That was something that was a perfect example of the collaboration between so-called socialists and the so-called progressive wing of the union bureaucracy. This same socialist, so-called socialist movement actually encouraged workers to vote for Trump. Some of them said it overtly, and some of them said it indirectly. We have to look also at the whole issue of Ukraine. Now, here you have an imperialist invasion that, if you look at what's been happening, there's very little difference between what Russia is doing in Ukraine and what Israel is doing in Gaza. And if you, for instance, look at pictures of Mariupol and look at pictures of Gaza City, you won't be able to tell the difference. And the socialist movement has channeled the absolute lie of that fascistic leader, Putin, that it's all about NATO, NATO, NATO. There was never a chance for Ukraine to join NATO. In fact, the majority of Ukrainians before the 2022 invasion were opposed to joining NATO. And it was, Putin is on record time and time again as saying that Ukraine has no right to exist. And it's clear he wants to reestablish an imperial Russia like what happened, like what existed under the Tsar. And yet, you see the overwhelming majority of the socialist movement channeling those lies of the fascistic, connected imperialist Putin. So just a couple points about what I see developing. And you see now, there's an interesting article in today's New York Times that outlines the beginning of a opposition within a layer of the capitalist class, opposition to Trump. And because they see what's happening is Trump's, the real power behind the throne, Musk and his fellow Silicon Valley capitalists, what they're trying to do is, as I said, tear down all the institutions of US capitalism and in order to privatize it, in order to take them over themselves. And this means includes everything from all the wings of the US government, law enforcement, from law enforcement to weather to monitoring the weather, which is very important, incidentally, for both for agriculture and real estate development. They want to take them over themselves and completely tear up the so-called rule of law, which means establish a level playing field for the capitalists, that they know the rules of the game, when they are going to invest. They know there's some kind of stability. And so a layer of the US capitalists now are starting to see, this isn't really going to work for us. So you're going to see, I think, a developing split within the capitalist class. At the same time, the working class is increasingly becoming shocked by what is happening. And those two developments, a shock to the working class and a split within the capitalist class, are prescriptions for a movement from below, which I think will be confused and chaotic. And the most important task of socialists, I believe, will be to combat the influences of the Democratic Party and their representatives, which include the non-profiteers and the entire union bureaucracy, including its progressive wing. And as I say, the majority of the socialists are in bed with those forces. So that will be an added issue. The same socialists that encouraged the election of Trump are now going to be trying to oppose Trump. So those are some points that I would raise as far as the situation in the United States, and obviously it has major global consequences.
I appreciate that. I think identifying splits in the ruling class and where they are is going to be huge. Guillermo, do you have responses, thoughts on any of that? And are we going to be able
a lot
exactly? And just one other thing: are we going to be able to rein in these two authoritarians? Want to be fascists in the foreseeable future? What forces can do that? Is there anything? Anyway, go ahead, Guillermo.
Yeah, I think even though the president looks dystopian, and it really does, and it has, I think the last year and a half has been amazing, and a bit of it has to do with this thing you were talking about of shock and awe. Evidently, it's not a coincidence. It's a political orientation to keep the blows coming and to sort of move the landscape, the scenario so fast that it can be a bit dizzying. But we've had in Israel crowdfunding genocide. I mean, you had like real estate schemes on Gaza, even before, and now with Trump's explicit call, this IA video he put up was something so grotesque and insulting, but it really underlines an imperialist action without even a facade of supposed protection of democracy and humanitarianism, which they've been lying about, of course, but it shows a new epoch in this sense. And I think this sort of full-on assault will even if a first blow can be disconcerting, it will make the working class and the masses react. And we have been over the even in these times and this past few years, we've seen popular rebellions, we've seen mass strikes, we've seen a tendency to organize in unions, even in the United States and Western Europe, and definitely we've seen popular rebellions in Latin America, in the Arab world. We've seen also a growth of the left, but in general, under reformist terms, which have led it to frustration. So it is wrong to assume that only the right wing politics are moving. Even recently in Europe, of course, the main headlines, and it is a strong tendency in the bourgeoisie, and it has been useful electorally, this ultra-fascistic ultra-right, like Le Pen, like AfD in Germany, but Mélenchon and now Die Linke made a big comeback in the last elections in Germany. The problem is that these formations are mm, tailing their own bourgeoisie on all terms, including on the military issue, which is the main international problem of the moment, where they've sided completely with the NATO in the Ukrainian war, where they support the militaristic drive that's going on in Europe now, and the idea of a buildup. And I think it's a very big problem if we have a part of the left who suddenly thinks European imperialism is some sort of a charitable, democratic group of people. It is not. It is one of the nucleus of world imperialism, a very important one. We've suffered Britain here for very long decades of our history. They're not looking for goodwill among people. They're defending their own capability for imperialistic spoil in a very strong moment of clashes. So I think we have to look at it on a world scale. Trump is addressing the decline of U.S. imperialism. He does this very openly. It's what he talked about in his inaugural speech, and he is addressing it with a very strong imperialistic push, very aggressive one. He's not here to bring peace. Both peace negotiations that he's pushed for in Gaza and in Ukraine have a very clear show that he's talking about ethnic cleansing and taking over the land in Gaza. He's talking about getting half of the rare earths in Ukraine for the U.S. So it is very much in line with this general sort of take what we want, Panama Canal, Greenland, and so on policy. And at the same time, what he's doing is shaking up the alignments in the international clashes, which has to do with a different strategy, a different sector of the U.S. bourgeoisie, who sees that the multilateralism with NATO, with United Nations, with Europe is not working for them, and that they need to be able to advance on China and Russia, where for decades they participated and promoted, together with the restorationist bureaucracies, the restoration of capitalism, but it sees governments which now have some measure of autonomy and dispute with them in China and Russia. So they want to, their strategy, and in this they've shared, Biden and Trump, the different wings, to put names on the different wings of the U.S. imperialism, they share the need to advance on China, that they want to control that capitalist process and not the bureaucracy of the Chinese Communist Party. This is a strategy that they share. That's why Biden did not pull back the tariff war and the commerce war that Trump had started in his first government. They share a common strategy in that sense. But evidently, Trump wants in this immediate juncture to be able to make an agreement with Russia to be able to center on China. And he's also wants more imperialist dispute with Europe, sees them as a rival, and he wants to pressure strongly in countries like Latin America. So it's a change on the world scale, which we think it's important to see is adding to the threat of a world war, and he's not here to bring peace. This is very clear. First. Second, and on the problem of Ukraine, the humiliation of Zelensky in the White House last week did not start with the Trump administration. The humiliation of the Ukrainian government, and that is attempted to be put on the Ukrainian people, has to do with the fact that national autonomy cannot be won through an agreement with imperialism. It's a means that will not serve to that end. You can ask the Kurdish people if their decades of military collaboration with the U.S. in the Middle East has helped them to win a state for their people, and they haven't. Actually, we've had last week also Okalam of the PKK give up the idea of fighting for any sort of national autonomy in exchange for being released from prison by Erdogan in Turkey. But in a more general term, I think it's important to draw a conclusion. Joining the imperialist European Union and becoming a NATO base is not a path for the freedom of Ukraine. Russian oppression, of course, is a huge problem, and in that I agree with John's description. But the idea that you can side with Britain, France, Germany, and the US, and this will be the path to national liberation, has been a false path. And there have been many leftists as well who have confused the defense of Ukrainian autonomy with the idea that an army funded and run by NATO can be a means to achieving their freedom. And evidently, they're pawns in a game where those who decide the plays are not interested in the autonomy and national sovereignty of Ukraine. In 2014, there was a rebellion against the pro-Russian government, which led to a profoundly pro-imperialist orientation to be led into the country, which before the war had already made it the poorest and most indebted country in Europe. So they've been sacking Ukraine for a while. On both sides, of course, Putin wants to sack, and so has the US, both the Biden wings and now the Trump. So evidently, the need for a revolutionary leadership, for one that can bring together the aspirations of the people in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine, is not going to come from either of those imperialist sides. And this is true as well in Latin America. It's true all over the world. We need an independent, working class position in this conflict. The position as the one that Lenin, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg put in the First World War, the correct position is of revolutionary defeatism against governments of war, of hunger on both sides of the lines. It's the international unity of the working class against these different reactionary and, in certain senses, imperialist camps. Though Russia is not a traditional imperialist power, it is still acting in the same annexionist, militaristic, imperialistic way. So this crisis of leadership that we were discussing, we think we need a Zimmerwald, like it was necessary after the collapse of the left. The left has become collaborationist to a great degree, has integrated into the bourgeois state, and this situation of war has showed many leftists siding with their own bourgeoisie. We've seen this. US leftists siding with the Biden government, which was putting up the Ukrainian camp. And this is not a revolutionary policy. Neither is to side with the Putin side, of course. So we need to regroup the independent camp of revolutionaries. And we've been working on this very hard with organizations from many countries. And I want to give you the news, Nick, that in Naples, Italy, the 14th and 15th of June, there will be an internationalist conference where already over 20 working class revolutionary organizations have agreed to call an open conference against war, against all imperialist blocs, against NATO, Trump, the European Union, and also saying that the BRICS bloc is completely reactionary, is not anti-imperialist, will not lead to multilateralism or world peace. Finally, so the comparison between Ukraine and Israel that John did is a false one. Zelensky offered himself openly, and his speech is saying this, to be the Israel of Eastern Europe, to be the military enclave that can help Western imperialism reorganize. It has been his program to try to overcome the economic difficulties, the poverty of Europe and its place in imperialist oppression by offering itself as a military pawn against Russia, which has a conflict with Western Europe. And this strategy has shown itself to be a complete tragedy for the Ukrainian people, who must reject this pro-imperialist policy. Finally, on the comrade talked about Labor Fest. I mean, I'm not a militant in the US. I was invited by comrades there, and I think it was very interesting because as a revolutionary, we had meetings with young people and workers from many different organizations. It was an advance in political contacts, in debates. And I think we have to value United Front initiatives. If revolutionaries want our organizations to not just be verbal, but to be shown themselves to actually organize workers and our capability for doing this, and why a revolutionary orientation is better than reformist ones, we have to go and speak, act together, and debate in many places where there are organizations that we do not consider revolutionary. So without speaking to the details of the organizing committee, which I'm not really fully aware of, but I don't think it can be faulted or it's a bad thing to go and open up a debate with revolutionary positions in places where maybe there are reformist comrades, maybe there are comrades who are not anti-bureaucratic enough in their unions or whatever. If it's a political debate and it clarifies the positions of revolutionaries, I think a sectarian approach in talking to oneself does not help to stop being just a voice that speaks position, but to form working class organizations that can act in the streets. That's our capacity to organize real life combat organizations of the working class, which with all our faults, we are a minority in Argentina, but we are an organization with thousands of militants, with roots in the unions, in the neighborhoods, in the youth movement, in the women's movement, which are a public electoral force against the bourgeois parties as well. And I think that's what revolutionaries have to do. If not, they're just words on paper.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna give you a chance to come back, John. I just wanted to say the one area where you guys are overlapping. I remember the Yorgos Mitrialis piece that you posted on Oakland Socialist. John, Trump the peacemaker, like Hitler the chancellor of peace. That one also talked about Milei. How these people are not trying to get peace. That is not the goal. But yeah, clearly there's disagreement. I'm going to give John the chance to kind of finish up and give some thoughts on this in the context again of Trumpism and what are we doing here?
Look, nobody is talking about entering into or confining ourselves to the echo chamber that the so-called socialist left confines itself to, which, as I say, is more distance from the working class today than ever in my life. And nobody is talking about distancing ourselves from the working class. I myself organized and led a wildcat strike of 2,000 carpenters, which also involved thousands of other building trades workers. That was in 1999. The fact is, though, that all this celebration of the labor movement, like, I'm not criticizing Guillermo for having been there. Number one, he's in Argentina. He's not that familiar with the labor movement here. My point is that in none of this is there ever any serious discussion about the role of the union leadership and how to organize within the rank and file against it. There's never any, and the reason that there's never any serious discussion is, and I'm saying this from my own personal experience, including knowing very well the main organizer of Labor Fest, Steve Zeltzer, who, how does that Labor Fest get financed? It's by the same union bureaucracy. And none of this left will actually try to organize within the rank and file to combat the disastrous role of this union bureaucracy, whose role has led to about half of its members supporting MAGA. So that is the question. And yes, it's great to see people organizing unions and all of that. But almost all of that organizing does not include a rebellion against the straitjacket in which the union bureaucracy has confined the unions, and it almost all has failed. So, and this is in a situation in which now you see Trump has released 1,500 violent fascist organizers who are going to be financed by Elon Musk. And that is a really serious threat. Now, I want to get to the issue of Ukraine and NATO and so on. And I'd like to compare it to the following situation. If you see a woman being raped and a cop intervenes to stop that woman from being raped, now we know why the cop is doing that. It's not because he's against rape. It's because we can't, capitalism cannot have stability and profits if you have complete lawlessness. But are you going to denounce the cop, or are you going to denounce the rape? That is what the socialist left that is denouncing NATO focuses all their attention on denouncing NATO, that is what they are doing. And they are ignoring the rape. They are ignoring the mass murder that it's not EU is carrying out, it's that Putin is carrying out. They are ignoring the terrorism, mass terrorism against civilian population, mass rape, mass kidnapping. They are ignoring all of that. And so, you know, let's not forget that during World War II, every socialist movement, every socialist group around the world demanded that the United States send aid to the Republican forces who were fighting fascism in the Civil War. And let's not forget that U.S. capitalism, U.S. imperialism was sending aid to the Soviet Union during World War II. No socialist group opposed that. So then we want to talk about Israel. No, it is not a false comparison. The same things that Russia is doing in Ukraine is what Israel is doing in Gaza, and including what it's doing in the West Bank, mass ethnic cleansing. We don't hear the denunciations of that. We just say, oh, you know, you can't support NATO. But we don't hear any kind of denunciation of maybe a little peep here and there. That is a betrayal of the number one duty of any socialist, which is international working class solidarity. So, and it's not, I have to say, I heard Guillermo over and over again attack the role of NATO and Western imperialism. Yes, and he's right about that. But incidentally, but I just heard one or two words, hardly more than a couple of sentences, about the role of Russia in their mass murder and their mass war crimes in Ukraine. So that balance is very interesting. One last point that I want to make is that I heard Guillermo constantly talk about imperialism, and he's right about that. But there's an even more important issue, or there's a better way to put it. Let's talk about capitalism itself. It's not just imperialism. And I agree with him that no nation can have true autonomy under capitalism. That's especially now. It wasn't even possible 100 years ago, and it's even more impossible now with the enormous globalization of world capitalism. And so, yes, you have to link the struggle against imperialism and link the struggle for democratic rights, which is incidentally, and I would add this, that real democratic rights are not possible under capitalism whatsoever. But we support democratic rights. During the civil rights movement, for instance, it would have been insanity. It would have been a betrayal for socialists not to give full support to the civil rights movement in the South. But still, it's impossible to end racism under capitalism. It's impossible to end white supremacy under capitalism in the United States. But that doesn't mean that we don't give full support to that fight for democratic rights. And that's the same case with Ukraine. And, you know, all the people that I hear on the left denouncing, you know, support for NATO and all that, and ignoring what's actually happening on the ground and in the air in Ukraine, I haven't found any of them that actually have made links with socialists, with trade unionists, and so on, with women's rights activists, with environmentalists in Ukraine. I have. And they're perfectly clear on what was going to happen if Putin takes over Ukraine. It will be complete crushing of all democratic rights, mass murder, mass ethnic cleansing. And so, yes, it does make a difference if Putin's invasion wins or not. It makes a difference in the lives of millions of workers And yes, it will spread from there to other parts of Europe, because yes, Putin is the world centralizing force for ethno-nationalism and for fascism. And it's no accident that Putin, Trump, and Netanyahu all lined up together at the UN in that recent vote.
Well, I just want to say I want to just get back to another point. Clearly, you guys disagree on Ukraine. I think I think those disagreements are clear. I just want to say, so clearly Trump doesn't seem to have any interest in supporting Ukraine anymore. He's just recently
lined up with Putin.
Exactly,
he's a Putin agent.
So in the immediate term, what is if the bureaucracy of the unions have sold out, what is the method by which we are going to be able to challenge Trump and Putin, for example, in this immediate term? Can we rely on the youth? Is there elements of the working class or elements of the rank and file that we can rely on? University students? How do you see us challenging this? And I'll give you each a little minute. If I don't know who wants to go first, and then we can kind of wrap up. But how do we challenge this? Trump, Milei, all these people. We've got to figure out a way to get organized to do it, because I don't think we're going to agree on Ukraine in the immediate term either. So, what are your thoughts, Guillermo?
Well, we need to open up a debate in the vanguard and the activists on the need for the revolutionary political organization of the working class, on the need for a revolutionary party. There's no shortcut for this. And I think the need for this is felt. I think the US is probably one of the places where it is most felt, because there have been thousands of people who consider themselves socialists, whatever the reality or the limits of that may be. And they've seen the Democratic Party lead to one of the biggest defeats and failures in decades. And they have a huge fight coming up, and they know that they can't depend on the AFL-CIO, on Bernie Sanders, or an AOC. So you guys are gonna have to build an actual political organization of the working class. Now, what the debates and processes of that are going to be, and whether that succeeds or fails, I think I don't want to think I have I know what that's going to be like, but we definitely hear, even from the distance that we have between us, debates opening up on the need for a working class party. Call it a Labor Party, call it an independent party from the Democrat Party. We've been hearing all sorts of positions on these lines, and I think that the important thing is we don't need to build a centrist sort of middle ground electoral thing, which have failed and are going to lead to frustrations. We need to actually discuss how to build a revolutionary organization that's active from the unions, from the workplaces, from the places of study. So if the experience that we've had of the PO and the left front in Argentina, where we haven't achieved a workers' government, we are a minority in the working class, even though we have important roots and an important level of organization, can help to that. We'd love to be able to open up a dialogue, because we think this is a strategic problem which needs to be addressed. We're not going to solve it thinking that each of us are the only person who ever thought there's a need to go up against the trade union bureaucracy, to discuss the need for a political strategy. We know there's thousands of individuals and organizations who, with political differences, express this. So we're going to need to be able to open up a process of an open call on the basis of internationalism, on the basis of working class independence from both bourgeois parties, and on the basis of direct action against the state and the bosses. We need a revolutionary party. I think we need it internationally. We need a revolutionary international. This is why we are calling for actions like the one I was talking about, and you definitely need it in the States. So I think what this huge activism, which has been active in the struggle for Palestine, very active. It's been impressive for us from abroad, or what we've been able to see, which has disgusted socialism even within reformist organizations such as DSA, which are leading to a huge frustration. So what are those people going to do, and where are they going to go? So I think this is the exciting moment, even within the catastrophe, so to speak. that there are thousands of people asking themselves this question. So any of us who think they have something to contribute to turning that into an opportunity for revolutionary organization, I think it's an important moment to get to work.
So, John, we talked about the last year. What are we going to be doing to combat authoritarianism in the next year? What should people be doing?
So I think we have to start out with perspectives, with what we think will develop, and then how we operate within that. Because we are not going to build a movement. The movement, as things stand right now, the movement, if one develops, it will develop almost spontaneously on its own. That was what we saw, for instance, in the protests against Israel's mass slaughter in Palestine. And I think that the role of well, I've been to a lot of protests, including ones around Israel, Palestine, and including ones about Ukraine in support of Iranian Americans who are protesting against that murderous regime. And one thing that I've noticed is all these protests are separate, and there's no attempt to unite the struggles. And so I think that one of the foremost things that we have to advocate is to unite the struggles, the liberation struggles, including, and I think Guillermo would disagree with me on this, but including the struggle against that fascistic invasion of Ukraine. Unite all these different struggles. The other thing that I think that we have to advocate within that is, where are the unions? Because
sorry, John, I don't want to interrupt just because you mentioned me.
But you are.
We openly call for Russian troops to leave. We reject the invasion of Russia of Ukraine, and we want the NATO to leave as well.
Yeah, but that's a secondary. It's like calling for opposition to the cops when the cop is stopping a rape. So, no,
it's calling the opposition to the bourgeoisie of your country, which is your task as a socialist.
No. Who is raping Ukraine at this point?
The U.S. has been since 2014.
Who was conducting the
a lot
mass
of people are
in Ukraine?
Yeah,
Guillermo,
but the U.S. and Western Europe raped Ukraine.
Guillermo, I did not interrupt you, and I would appreciate it if you would let me complete my thought. Thank you very much. So, we need to call for uniting these struggles, and also, as I said, you go to any of these protests, including the protests around just strictly domestic issues like the role of the police. And the thing that is so absent that nobody even notices it is the labor movement. You'll have one or two union members, but the union leadership has completely failed. In fact, it opposes mobilizing its membership. I went to Ferguson back a few years ago when Michael Brown was killed there. I got to talking to a member of the UAW who told me that his union president had told him, this is not our battle. And so that's the other thing, is that we have to call for the organizing within the unions, for the unions to get involved and to lead a struggle like that. And also link that up with the call for an independent party of the working class in the United States. One last thing I think that is really important to raise. You see, I went to a protest on Sunday against Trump and J.D. Vance channeling Putin in the White House there. And I asked to speak. None of the speakers would explicitly denounce Trump, by the way. None of the speakers. So I asked to speak, and I wanted to make a connection between what Israel's doing and what Russia is doing. And I wanted to make a point about the labor movement and its silence on these issues. And they wouldn't let me speak. And you will find that all across the board, including the protests against Israel. And so the other thing that I think that we have to call for is to say that, look, these protests are good, but they should be organized democratically with all different points of view of all different supporters of that cause. Be involved in the organizing and also have a space on the speaker's platform. So I think that those are some of the main things: unite the struggles and democratic with a small d method of organizing. I think those are some really important issues for us to raise. And also independence from the Democratic Party and from those who represent the Democratic Party, which are the non-profiteers and the union bureaucracy, all wings of the union bureaucracy.
I'll let you, do you want to state your position like officially, Guillermo? Or, I mean, we can just, I mean, I think you guys disagree.
Yeah, I think I made it clear. I just wanted to point out that we oppose the invasion of Ukraine, that we think it's been raped by the imperialists of the United States and Europe, even.
How can it be stopped then if you oppose it? How can it be stopped?
You guys
by a revolutionary position against both imperialisms, which, of course, when there's a war going on, as there was, for example, in France and Germany.
If you call for the disarming of those who were trying to fight that invasion, you were calling for success of the invasion. That's you were.
I mean, I have no problem with dialoguing, but
there's no way around it. There's no
waging a war for the right of Ukraine to join NATO is not national liberation. It is a form of slavery of those people. It is not freedom. That's our position. If that's not clear, we can continue to discuss it another day. Second point, why do revolutionaries from Latin America have a bone to pick with the US? Because they are the main imperialist power, which sucks the blood and riches out of our country. And there are national struggles to be waged under capitalism. It's true. We will not achieve freedom without socialist unity of our countries, but that socialist unity will be achieved by struggling against all imperialisms, and the main one, which is at the throats, for example, in Latin America and most of the world, is the US, which is why we make, how do you say it? You sense a nuance where even though we reject Russia, China, and many other reactionary capitalist countries where, you know, in China today, the main economic form is capitalism, we have a stress against the US because it is the empire which is at our necks. Now, revolutionaries in imperialist countries, Lenin was very clear on this and many other historians, have a duty. Your first opposition is to your imperialist government. And John, I've heard you say the main problem is Putin in the US. No, the main problem are the Democrats, the Republican, and the Pentagon, the US regime. And you have a tactical agreement, not just you, DSA. They vote. The left votes. The left votes. The Pentagon budget in Congress. Wait, John.
Trotsky supported the U.S. war against Hitler. How do you explain that?
I can't finish my sentence. So the problem we have is that the left in the European Parliament.
Latin America is not Europe. Latin America is not Europe. You're saying the same, but you're projecting.
We're semi-colonial countries dominated by Europe. We're semi-colonial countries dominated by Europe and the US. And we demand the left of the United States and Europe to not vote for the military budgets of NATO, to vote against them. And the left that favors the budgets and the military strategy of imperialism is pro-imperialist and is not revolutionary.
You know what you're doing is you're projecting the situation of World War I onto this situation. But there's a little war between World War I and the present. There's one other little war that you're forgetting about. That was World War II. And let's not forget that towards the end of his life, Trotsky supported the U.S. going to war against the Nazis. And what you were saying is, no, he supported under certain conditions, that's true. But he supported U.S. going to war against the Nazis.
So you think Biden and Macron are struggling for democracy? I think they're struggling for.
Neither was the U.S. Neither was the U.S. in World War II. Neither was the U.S. in World War II.
I don't think we're going to come to an agreement on this.
But what you were doing, is calling for. Hold on. What you were doing is calling for the disarming of Ukraine, which would allow Putin's forces.
We're calling for the fraternization of Russian and Ukrainian workers on both sides of the trenches.
Roll over Ukraine like a steamroller, crushing millions of people. Yes,
that's why we have a political relationship with the Russian dissidents in the jails organizing the unions.
It's no different from opposing a cop stopping a woman.
All right, I'm gonna mute both of you for 1 second. I want to finish here. I think you both agreed on one thing, was that we need a workers' party. We need an independent workers' party that can democratically come to some of these decisions. And I think that's what's clearly missing in the U.S. right now, is that we don't have a functional way to organize around these things. DSA ain't it. I think I have a slightly different position than both of you, but that I'm not going to go into that detail on Ukraine. But I think we really need to, take on the authoritarians that we find ourselves dealing with. I think we're going to have to get away from, somewhat of personal attacks and, putting words in each other's mouths if we're going to organize together. I think there's a little bit of that goes on across the board that I've seen in DSA and other places as well. I think we can do it. I think we can organize a working class party, and I think we can defeat the authoritarians. But again, these discussions are going to happen. This is one of those discussions now. I appreciate you guys speaking with me. Like I said, I don't think you're going to come to an agreement on this, but I really appreciate you being willing to come and discuss, even though it's obviously something that is going to make people feel strong emotions, as I think it should. If you're a revolutionary, you should feel strong emotions about this stuff. If you guys want to unmute yourselves, just wanted to say thank you for coming on. And, I have faith that both of you want to see a successful working class revolution, even though you both strongly disagree and have very strong emotions about that, about what is the right path.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Nick.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And thank you, Guillermo.
Good.
And we will live to argue again one day. Take care.
Okay.
And that's our special interview. Thanks for listening. Solidarity.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.